everybody. I'm so excited about slots, and thank you, Figma, for the privilege to come here and share a lot of this great work that Zoe, Maria, Ed, and the rest of the team have been doing. This is a fantastic feature, and I think is going to unlock so much for everyone. My name's Nathan Curtis. I'm a design system consultant that works with companies large and small to make their systems better. I come from Fairfax, Virginia, and you'll find me socializing on LinkedIn, moving my writing from Medium to Substack, and participating with around 20,000 or more design system practitioners in the design system Slack. Over the years, I've made and remade many components many times. A row that's in feeds, an action list menu, the eponymous card. Each of these invokes questions of configuration and composition. I know them well, and I know many of you out there in the audience know them well too. Each includes slots where you can compose custom content. And until now, the industry standard has been to include that pesky little pseudo slot utility component asset, here represented by an orange zone. The technique never really felt right. The ergonomics of swapping instances didn't really fit the expression that designers needed. They just wanted to edit what's inside. So I'm glad that this big orange thing it's never really been great, and we're ready to move on. And so as slots roll out, we're going to refactor our libraries. We're going to replace those utilities and likely add many more great zones too. So during this talk, I'm going to ask you to think about your libraries that you have. Think about how they're going to change. I'm also going to ask you to feel what it's like to use it, particularly from your designer's point of view, not your system maker's point of view. And ultimately, challenge you to think about how flexible are you really willing to go. But before diving into replacing the slot utilities, slots are going to impact things that didn't have those utilities in the first place. Checkbox group is a great example of that. Before, we would invite designers to take that instance and go into the layer panel and show and hide layers. Maybe we'd have 3 by default, we'd have 3 hidden by default, but you couldn't reorder them. You couldn't add a 7th one. Designers were drowning in a part of the UI that really didn't fit how they're supposed to create experiences. Even if you didn't realize it, those hidden instances or hidden layers were along for the ride, bloating your file at the same time. So now, if you use a a slot for one of those groups of items, designers can directly compose in there, duplicate items, reorder items, use that magic handle to add 20 items. They feel faster, focused, and in control. Now, slots also promise a lot of flexibility, and my favorite component I've ever worked on is, we'll call it today row. Some teams call it list group, other teams call it entity. Whatever you call this thing that has a visual on the left, text in the middle, and actions on the right. Pretty simple 3-part layout. Actually, row isn't simple at all. Designers express a wide range of variation even in a component like this. Diverse compositions of content and text, distinct interactive paths that they want to include in other spaces, and ultimately, lots of tiny highlights and details. This kind of variation has no business belonging in your component props. Designers need slots. And so when you think about these slots and you architect your component, keep a principle in mind. Make the common configurable and make the uncommon composable. Use props so designers can quickly configure the things that they do all the time. But use slots to provide areas for designers to express what they need when they need it, when those uncommon cases arise, frankly, also all the time. And so, as we go down this path of using slots, we're going to be challenged to think about a row component and think, what's legitimate to go into that leading visual area? An avatar with a cute dog? Sure. A mark? Yes. How about an image? Yeah, probably. Should we offer a slot there? It'll be anarchy, right? And so we invoke these questions of rigidity or flexibility of our component. On the left, we have a nested instance. It's only ever going to be an avatar. We can make it that dog by default. Or on the right, we can just put an open slot and let them do whatever they want. If you're thinking in that kind of binary way, as a system, you need to do better. And Figma enables us to do better. In the past, we've actually used variants or subcomponents to provide that range of alternatives, the dog, the mark, or the avatar, the mark, and the image. Or we might have even started to use that slot utility as an escape hatch, the last variant of that set of different variants in the subcomponent. But now with slots, we need to start from the other end of the spectrum. How can we add things like preferred values to position that avatar, mark, or image? Or even put a default into the slot so that we can combine the preferred values with a default value that we can configure to have the cute dog too. Ultimately, we might end up somewhere in the middle, such as which one's on top? Do we have a slot that contains a variance? Or do we have variants that contain a slot? And so you're going to have to make these kinds of choices, and they all include subtle trade-offs. You'll have to balance properties and slots in ways that work best for your system, because different systems will make different choices for different reasons. Many components like this will end up somewhere in the middle. But make no mistake, the arc of systems is going from rigid to flexible, a configurable left towards a more composable right. And so slots are just for the visual part, right? That text remains stable, unchanged. We're going to configure it the way we always have. Well, let's take a look at the row. Notice anything? This component's a powerhouse. And it really fails the composability squint test if you look down the middle. I see icons, more text, links, subtle layout shifts. Text may warrant slots too. And so as you think about how low your slots go into your components, that none part of the spectrum really isn't acceptable anymore. We're going to need to do stuff to position things near our titles, subtitles, and metadata. So do you go shallow and just put all those text elements inside a default slot? Or do you go even deeper and start making slots for each one of those things? Now, that's pretty complicated, right? It's also kind of scary. And let's amp up the fear a little bit, because we're going to talk about button. Every design system conversation talks about button, okay, with its rich array of states, variants, types, sizes. There's all sorts of different facets of how a button works. But let's dig in. Should button be composable? Because today, most teams, although I know one team, you won't add an icon to your button or to any degree, but most teams have things like a leading icon. And so how do we enable that via prop and swap out add for a magnifying glass? But if we want to add a slot, our instinct might be, let's put it on the tail end. But what if we need no space in between the label and the slot? Let's make it really tight then, and the designer then has to add their own auto layout to space out things. Well, that's kind of a pain. What if we just put everything in the slot? Okay, I can feel the tension in this audience right now. Okay, you all are like, whoa, wait, we're going a little bit too fast here. Okay, this feels like blasphemy. But people need to put stuff in buttons sometimes. Okay, so what kind of experience should your designers have when they're using a component like button? Should they be able to just hide the icon or get rid of it and drag the counter label and put it inside? You know what that felt like? Fast, easy to make, pretty easy to hand off. As a designer, I'm feeling empowered. And as a system designer, you know what? I can still have all those strong defaults because default slot content is per variant. It also is how code works. And suddenly, my component asset is simplifying. Would we ever really do this? I think a lot of design system teams are like, Nathan's crazy, I'm never going to do that. But you have to think and put yourself in the designer's shoes, too, around the goals that they need to achieve and make the choices to empower them. Slots also have a lot of parts, and the card remains a great example. Some cards are simple. They have a title and subtitle. Maybe you have a card-specific review that you can put in there, or you have a nested icon list. But really, once you start doing all this other stuff with pricing and merchandising, things get really chaotic, okay? And as we look at cards and we think about all the variations of how we want to sell something like a Haleakala Sunrise Hike, suddenly those layouts and arrangements of all those different items way too diverse to handle with some sort of configurable set of props. And so we have to think about how do we understand what's inside and what's stable. Maybe you have a lockup for your title and subtitle, or it's just embedded in the card itself. Maybe you make a review that's specific to the card, and you know you're going to use the icon list. But there's going to be a lot of experimentation that happens. And so if you have things like prices and struck through original prices and member price available and how you want to show different things, how do you pay attention as a design system to the experimental arrangements, but still have a good sense and maybe even some controls around the stable, smaller parts? We want our prices to be this size. We want to use a red badge for a discount percentage, but a green badge for actually dollars that are being taken off. And how do you express these things in your system so that people can achieve the consistency that they need to? Slots also open up a whole bevy of layout alternatives and options. How is someone inside a slot going to nest layers, start to vary the direction horizontally and vertically, add their intricate padding and item spacing, and even start to solve things like responsive web design because they're responsible for what's inside? As I made these examples for the card, which I've done over and over again, I felt really fast. It took about 5 minutes. I was totally in command of auto layout. I've used that tool or portion of Figma's UI a lot, and I'm very familiar with it. And I also felt very carefree. I know Figma can help me with my layer names. I wasn't even bothering with layer names. I wasn't even adding design tokens. I was adding, yes, a number 8 in lots of places. And I didn't care. It didn't matter. But so what do you expect? Everyone wants to be fast. Many designers aren't familiar with auto layout as well as I am, probably, though. That's a challenge. And systems people fear a lack of meticulous expression. And when you open up slots, you're going to open up the opportunity for people to be responsible for what they're putting in there themselves. Examples are going to play a key part. As I think about what designers deliver, given slots, what can we do better so that we can best enable the component's purpose and potential to be realized? When you add a big pink space, it's a big blank canvas. Are they always supposed to know what they're supposed to do with it? And examples play a key role, and that expands what designers deliver today. Maybe they deliver the component asset and the component parts that go with it. These days, just as a little look into my world, I deliver specs, I deliver the component definition and data, I make plugins that do that kind of stuff to build upon the ecosystem that Figma already provides. But for slots in particular, we're going to have to pay attention to what I call ready-made examples. Teams already do this. They put these examples that are composed expressions that go into things like slots, adjacent to the asset they deliver. And so as you think about what designers need to be thinking through as system designers, they have to be thinking about how to express all the different ways we expect this kind of slot to be used to provide copyable assets that designers can benefit from. Your component assets are going to potentially tighten up. You're going to need potentially fewer properties because you're going to make more things composable. And at the same time, the examples that you need to express the potential are going to expand. And you're going to need to both show and tell how to compose. So it's up to you as design system practitioners to illustrate the possibilities, make building these things easy, and encourage experimentation. And not get caught in the trap of curating everyone's stuff, or blocking their work, or maintaining the kind of consistency that you're unable to maintain, or that you shouldn't be maintaining, because that might not be part of your job. Let's talk about a few more examples. One is the action list component. I love this component's nesting, because when you have an action list of a bunch of menu options, maybe it's down the left rail of a page, it's actually made up of a bunch of items, and so you start to separate your concerns. Those action lists also can have groups of items, and those groups can have their own individual group header. And the action list itself has a specific header. And so now we've got, for essentially one component in my mental model, a range of subcomponents that help me compose those things. With slots, oh my gosh, slots are everywhere. Slots enable us to have lists that include a header, item, or group. Groups have group headers or items. Items now also have their own leading and trailing visuals. And so you can see that these slots start to nest up through our component architecture. Figma layers also reveal that nested structure too. At the top level, you might choose to call children, which is a fairly code-centric term, and that those children map to how a React component might also be composed. And then as you drill down, you'll have more children of children, essentially creating this nested hierarchy of all of your different components. And so you ask yourself, how strictly is this stuff going to have to match the code that we make? One approach that you could take is being very strict. We have children of the action list group. Those children include the header, and when I start to compose with that, I pretty much know I just need to add more items. However, you better not reorder that group header to not be first, or if you remove it, it might be difficult to retrieve. Hint, there's a reset slot button. So even there, you have some risks around the potential outcome that a designer might have. And our instinct might be, well, let's put the header outside the slot. Suddenly, we can use a Boolean prop to control the header, have it separated as a concern, and the visual outcome is the same, but we are having some drift from the code. Also notice I renamed the slot here to be items, as opposed to just children. And so we're going to be making choices like that. How do we transform these things or keep them aligned so that we're designing for consistency, but building for flexibility? If designers and developers need to engage with a component differently, is it okay so long as our systems and things like Code Connect and other transformations maintain how things need to work together properly? For me, it's all good, and we need to make those choices as we go along. Credit to Tyler Fleck, a collaborator of mine whose repeated invocation of this as we worked through thinking about slots is now ground into my head. I love this quote. Preferred values also give us a good hook to improve consistency and feasibility. At each level, we can identify what is going to go where, and Figma can mirror, but not necessarily enforce, how to compose design like code is enforced. Here for the list, group, and item from left to right, code works in a particular way. But don't be mistaken, on the left two, code is actually made so that it's expecting certain kinds of children, the item and the header and the group on the far left. Whereas on the right, for that leading visual, it's acting more as a suggestion. And so we'll need to ensure that we're training and communicating how the system's intended to use and what the role of those preferred values are. I'll close with one thing, nesting layouts. Sure, composing within a component like checkbox group will feel rewarding and fast, but we'll start putting these things together. A checkbox item will be part of a checkbox group. We'll take that checkbox group and we'll put it in an accordion. And as we start to compose an experience, we'll start to duplicate that such that we're using those accordions of checkboxes to create a left rail to filter things. And suddenly we're combining slots with other Figma features that have been improving recently, things like grids, layout guides, and everything else. But can we do more? Yeah, we can go a little bit higher. Because as we build a page layout, we might have a page row component. Suddenly those grids, those layout guides, and potentially even default content make higher order compositions both controlled and faster to make. Let's go a little bit further from that layout container pattern. Maybe there's an actual layout pattern itself, combining two of those page rows and then customizing the content so that now we've got what amounts to a product category filtering pattern, this filter grid of sorts. Even here, you can start to see other places where in this level of asset, I can go into my breadcrumbs and add another breadcrumb level. I can add 2 more tabs to the end of that group pattern. Or maybe I just want to customize that row overall. It's not very far from this kind of layout pattern to get to a page template itself. And so while we might be thinking, oh, Figma's delivering slots, to me, we're delivering a whole nested hierarchy of the ability to put the right configurations at the right level. It's not just about lower order components. It's also going to help us start to control higher level layout systems. And this, you never could have done with a slot utility asset. I never would have even thought about doing that. The other thing is that I think it's going to require us to up our game. I hope that as we start to have these controls at different levels, we've got space, padding, item spacing, controls of destiny. I can imagine a future, I hope, that goes beyond the simple generic spacer tokens that we have and more descriptive and expressive spacing concepts through our token taxonomies. Ultimately, these are so many things that slots unlocks for us. And as we think about our groups and the flexibility we're willing to take, the parts and examples that we're going to need to architect, and how this nesting affects our ability to deliver on broader, higher order layout compositions, I'm super excited. I hope you are too. Have a great schema, everybody.